let's get started then. So the session's going to be recorded. We're going to circulate it with everyone afterwards. I'm really keen that as we go through the process, if anyone's got any questions or answers, just put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them as we go. If not, we've got a bit of time at the end for us to kind of go through everything. But it's as much, it's an open discussion. We're going to go through some of the elements of how the whole kind of like due diligence process is handled currently. And then we're going to start to look at some of the opportunities. And I'm quite excited. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Jacques. So I've been using Xama since October 2020. So that's almost 5 years that some of this stuff has been kind of plotting and brewing. So Jacques' background, he's a software engineer by trade, and this almost isn't his first rodeo. So Jacques and his team that he's been working with for a number of years started playing around with kind of data and a lot of consolidation. And then as a result of that, have almost moved into the compliance space. And I think Jacques is perhaps one of the only people that I know who's read all of the CCAB guidelines and has possibly developed a bit of an excitement for the space. So, Jacques, maybe you want to say a little bit
more. Thanks, Jonathan. Indeed, Jonathan was our first customer at Xama. So we go way back, and I've got a lot to be thankful for him in terms of kind of mentoring us a little bit at that early stage and being able to tap into his experience. A little bit about us and where we came from and how we got to be where we are. I was essentially working within an accounting firm, mainly looking at their kind of digital areas and really about integrations. So integrations was our key thing. We didn't do anything around AML, mainly integrations between CRM systems and Xero. We were the first certified developer on the Xero App Store, as an example. And that's kind of where the business started. And kind of grown from there. We kind of stumbled across AML as a subject when we did an integration project for a fairly large firm. And we just realized how big a problem it was in the first instance in terms of the disjointed nature of AML. We didn't really know at that point much about AML, so it was really just the beginning of getting in touch with it. But we could see already that there was a major problem. And then we also discovered how in the background, all these kind of services, ID verifications, searches, credit reports, all those kind of things, how disjointed in the background all these services was. So we saw an opportunity to kind of pull those things together and make it more accessible, especially for smaller firms, because that initial project was a big, expensive project which wouldn't have been accessible, and we wanted to kind of tie it together into a SaaS product that essentially we could give to people on a kind of pay-as-you-go, really affordable basis, and that's where we came from. Our focus on integrations have never stopped. We started off as a product that was only API, so we would only be accessible through things like Pixie back in the day, or if you were using HubSpot or Salesforce, we would integrate it into that. We realized that was a very hard sell to people to kind of give them something without an interface. So that's when we started to build up our user interface, and the rest really is history. We've had some great partnerships and integrations where most of our growth has come from. And we continue to do that. And Socket is another great example of a partnership we're really excited about, and something a little bit different to what we've been doing up till now. So very, very excited to be here. Thanks, Jonathan. And looking forward to a good conversation on this topic, which, is very exciting.
So let me kick off then. So if those of you don't know me, I'm Jonathan Gaunt. I run my own practice as well as building Socket with some friends. And for me, it's that kind of, I say that I've got the best job because I go to work one day, I spot problems, and then the next I can kind of ask Rich and the team of almost a bit of going, help. I think there's an opportunity here to do a little bit different, and that's really how we built Xama. We built Xavier in the first place, and almost like how we're getting on with doing things currently. So where I really wanted to kind of start is let's go through and almost look at what the typical AML process is, and I'm going to kind of look at this almost from an FD Works perspective. So I think in many respects, it's like we're missing an opportunity here because I see quite a bit of work that we're being kind of repeated throughout the process. So I almost see the discovery piece as being the bit where I will do some research on the internet. I'll perhaps go to company's house, explore a little bit about that company. I'll look on their website. But actually, if I'm being honest, I'm probably not documenting as much of that as I could. And so actually there'll be some great ideas, some great thoughts that are in there. And again, in our own practice at FD Works, we involve a number of people within this discussion. So one of the team will have that very first conversation with the client to almost understand a little bit more about the business. Are they a good fit? But actually we're not great at almost passing that information along and doing that real kind of deep exploration. We then get into the proposal place, and that's where Socket is brilliant of almost going through, looking at what a lot of those drivers are. But I think in a lot of instances, it's almost there's lots of people who will be relying on the asking the question of how many employees have you got? I think I've got 5. And then it's almost like you take that as word, and we perhaps don't come back and revisit it as much as we can. But hopefully you can build a beautiful proposal, send that out to the client, and where we've seen a big leap forward is around the letter of engagement and almost like the whole automation of those letters of engagement so that actually they're linked to services, they're very dynamic, it kind of flows through and makes it kind of really simple. I think, though, that where we really struggle, and I think until recently, Jacques, this is the bit where I've almost looked at AML as being an admin kind of task. It's almost like we see the excitement in the discovery phase. We go through the process of having some really good conversations, getting an awful lot of knowledge. And then almost at the end, it's that bit of, yay, we won the proposal. Oh, I've got to go through and do the customer due diligence. And I'm sure I may not be alone there.
Yeah, I mean, it's something people dread AML. Like, I think there's a very small percentage of people who really kind of find AML exciting. Mostly that's people who's kind of started to use new systems and kind of streamline things, who's starting to see more benefit from it. But historically, I think it's mainly something viewed as a barrier from signing that letter of engagement. Friction happens. It's a barrier before work can commence for a customer, and it's mainly seen as a drain on resources and cost. Which if you do it in the wrong way, or you've got the a kind of the wrong approach to AML, is very much what it is. Like, there's no getting away from it. It doesn't add particularly a lot of value. It does turn into a checkbox exercise for compliance. But we very much see it as not having to be that way, in that it could really start adding value to a business. But then really, to add that value, you need to start thinking about moving AML out of that kind of confined space, which sits between a letter of engagement being signed and starting work for a customer. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, is how do we move that process into different areas of your firm where it actually adds value, creates opportunities, reduce risk, and all those things which you can actually, start seeing the benefit from.
And I think it's quite interesting here because if we said to people, are you doing good account management? Are you having kind of conversations? I think a lot of the times it's that bit of, yes, you are. But I think so much of it, it's almost that bit of, we see it as the little bit that we're fearful of every year as a Xama practicing member. I have to kind of go through that process. And it's the one bit of going, oh, not that again. And it's
Yeah, I mean,
actually through the conversations we've had that you've perhaps shared some of that excitement with me. And maybe it's also the bit of starting to explore some of the opportunities of, I could use that somewhere else, that has got me quite excited.
yeah, and I mean, what we get in so many conversations is people saying, well, we know our customers. We've done that part. Why, we don't have any risk, and the and or we know what our risks are, and that is, I can't agree more with people kind of having telling us that and then having frustration for having to kind of duplicate that information or writing that information down and all the admin that goes with it. But the reason you know the customer and the reason you kind of have gotten to that point is you've actually completed, what's called this know your customer piece of AML, which is really important within that kind of discovery proposal page section where you're having those conversations, you're getting to know the client, you're doing your due diligence on Companies House and so on. But all of that is essentially kind of lost in the process and then replicated later on, either by yourself or even worse, it's being done by, an admin person who kind of have to start again from scratch and need to kind of find out that information again, or there's some sort of communication that needs to happen between the person who was doing that discovery to begin with and the person who's ultimately filling out the risk assessment. So it's just kind of like, there must be a better way to tie these things together to actually make use of, to reuse the stuff that you're already doing to meet that compliance requirement. And it doesn't just save time, it actually becomes exponentially more effective because you're doing it earlier on. You're getting to process and standardize that process of actually spotting opportunities, reducing risk, and making sure you're engaging with the clients that you should be engaging with or want to be engaging with, and you're not engaging, or you've got a less of a chance of engaging with clients that potentially is not the right fit for your business or is going to add more risk to the practice.
Is it worth us jumping in and looking at some of the gold that's available in Xama? And I'll perhaps, as we go through, give a bit of my perspective in terms of where I think some of the opportunities are as well that I've overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from our perspective, it's these things which are available in Xama. They're typically very useful to document that you're doing good due diligence. Um, and kind of just running through what those are, I think we can then have a look at how that could potentially add benefit or be much more valuable if you start looking at that much earlier within the engagement process. So those who's using Xama will be familiar with these kind of things, but for those who's not necessarily Xama users yet, or kind of just want to know more about what are the type of things we look at when we're using AML systems. Yeah, I'm just going to run through these very, very quickly. So the first thing is what we've got is a link into Companies House, which is a little bit more advanced than kind of just looking at the company record in Companies House. What you can see here is kind of how we visualize the ownership structure. So it'll go through to the first, second, third, fourth level of ownership, however many there are. And you can very quickly see whether there's complexities there, who's the directors, is there other opportunities to kind of approach some of those directors for self-assessments, whatever it might be. And then further on, something that we've been working on is actually breaking down that into more information. So if you can move to the next slide, Jonathan, we can start analyzing those relationships and give you a bit of a breakdown of what that shareholding is likely to be. So within that group structure, Exclu Group owns between 75 and 100% shares of Exclusive. This is based on the type of PSC that's registered with Companies House. And so we can traverse down the line and we can actually calculate what is the maximum potential shareholding of each one of those people within that structure. And that gives you not just a good idea about who are going to be the beneficial owners that you need to include in the AML process, but also probably who's the main people of influence within the business.
I
And then,
I get quite excited with this, Jack, as well as also like the opportunities here, because it's also what are the connected companies. So we may be having one conversation about one company, but if I can see there's a group structure, I can start to bring that into the conversation. I
yeah,
can also start to do a bit of research around who those directors are. And I know from my own experience, sometimes it's when you realize who's behind some of the businesses, you can have some really kind of interesting conversations, or actually, you know that the level of work that you need to do may be of a higher standard because it's a director of a PLC, and you kind of know that maybe they're going to approach this small business in the same way that they do their day job. So actually seeing this and the visualization of it, for me, really brings the whole piece to life.
yeah, and I mean, this is all information that's available on Companies House, right? But so you could go and kind of do that work yourself. But the problem of, how you visualize that very quickly, how do you document that? How do you access that information in the right place more easily? That's kind of where these things really start to become more valuable than kind of, trawling through different links within Companies House. If you go to the next slide, I'll quickly just run through, it kind of then becomes progressively more information that you can access. So we have a link in with Credit Safe, and many of you, I think, will be familiar with kind of credit reports. But looking at credit reports, we don't actually suggest to everybody that uses Xama to run credit reports. It's kind of used as a enhanced due diligence tool. It's potentially rare that the credit report is going to dramatically impact on the AML risk, which is kind of like, that's the stuff that's happening within Xama. But actually, the information within these reports becomes exponentially more useful if you've got them early on. So if you go on to the next slide, the kind of credit limit and the credit score, firstly, you can start looking at it slightly different. Like, what's the risk here? Why is the credit score low? Analyze why that might be the case. Is it something that you should be worried about? Is it potentially not a good customer for me? But then it's also about using the information, and I'm taking this as kind of one example. There's more examples of that within all the data that we're kind of looking at. But how can we kind of spin it around and say, oh, these guys don't have a particularly good credit score? That's going to really limit, or could really limit, what that business can achieve in terms of borrowing money, in terms of doing business. So what can you as an accountant do to help that customer going forward? And how do you almost build that into your proposals? How do you and how do you discuss that, or how do you suggest that within that first discovery meeting, almost going in knowing things about the customer they might not know themselves, and it's there to stimulate really good conversation. Things like and there's services out there which, for instance, you can kind of introduce customers to, which kind of helps you to improve that credit score, and you sell it on as a service, and the customer gets a lot of value from that.
And I think for me, this is almost like, so I know a company report it's got a small charge to it. It's £4, I think, Jack, £4 or £5, but it's a
Yeah.
relatively negligible kind of cost. And I just think that actually it starts to give you the standardization. So, and where you've got standardization, you can build a process which is then simple, logical, and repeatable that your team can follow. So you've got the breakdown that yes, you can get from Companies House, but just knowing how much cash they've got, knowing their debtors and creditors is really great. And I think that this is also a document that you can kind of share with a client or the prospect. And are the other people they're speaking to going to have that same conversation? And you're right. Is someone else going to say your credit rating's not great? What can we do to improve it? So I think there's loads of scope here to kind of do things in a very, very good way.
Yeah, and to a large extent, I mean, you mentioned that kind of first bit where you do the discovery and you go to Companies House. Again, a lot of the information that's within these credit reports comes directly from Companies House. It's then kind of analyzed, and it comes up with a credit score, and it combines it with some other data sources as well, to help kind of beef it up a little bit. But it's that kind of very quickly being able to have a document where all of that information is kind of consolidated into one report. If you go to the next slide, I've just briefly kind of put in there a few of the other things that's in there. So things like CCJs and bad debts, those kind of things are potentially not available as easily available. I mean, not. It's kind of it's just basically putting in that kind of reassurance that you're not doing business with somebody who's been in that position before. There's kind of a summary of the key financials, so creditors, debtors, like what's the ratios? Is there anything there? Like what is affecting the credit score? Well, the commentary around that, so that you can actually use that to go to the customer and say, well, why is your creditor balance so high? What's going on with your like purchase invoice payments? Is that something we need to look at, or is it your cash flow that's potentially the issue, and what's going on with your cash flow planning? But then SIC codes, VAT numbers, like much more information about ownership in terms of, for instance, is there any businesses owned by the business? So that graph I showed is about who owns that business, but is there any businesses that's owned by that business? And then, yeah, just to kind of it pulls out like 5 years of financial history rather than what you might see if you look at the most recent account. So just kind of pulling information together very quickly and easily, that makes it accessible. And again, it's not something, the value here is at that really early stage. It's not when you're doing your client risk assessment, which is why I don't necessarily suggest people, even routinely run these reports within Xama at that later stage. But I'm really excited about what value it can start providing in a system like Socket, which is much earlier.
I think there's a couple of exciting things, like some of the negative stuff. It's interesting to kind of hear the stories behind it. It's almost that bit of, do we really want to work with this client if you could understand the CCJs, etc. But I also think that it's around, can I build a process? And that's the bit that I've perhaps struggled today, is almost like, can I build a process that someone else can follow? And I know that is what the regulators are almost looking for. Do I have a process and do I follow it? So for me, I think this is fantastic that I can kind of see that and I can start to build on it.
Yeah. I think finally I've got just a very brief slide here. So one other thing, this is very familiar in the AML space as well. I think quite often, I mean, these checks, especially adverse media checks, can throw up some some things that that after a letter of engagement has been signed becomes an awkward conversation. It's better to know this information earlier on. So even though people are routinely running these checks as part of their AML check, the kind of suggestion I'm making here is to say, well, why not do this earlier on and prevent problems before they kind of come onto your doorstep? And things like, just to kind of cover off what these are, PEP and sanctions is quite familiar to everybody. But warnings would be looking at things like HMRC, deliberate tax defrauders, any kind of, there's so many data sources that it looks at to kind of provide that warning. Fitness probity is disqualify directors as an example. And then you can kind of look at all those adverse media types, and you can kind of tap into what is the ones that's most likely to affect your business. So, for example, we would probably not suggest you look at other minor offenses. You'll get a lot of notifications that's not relevant, but you might want to protect yourself against potential customers that's being linked to fraud, as an example. So yeah, there's a lot of information there which we feel could be more valuable. These are things that people are already running, they're already incurring the cost, but they're not getting the full value out of it, and potentially getting the value out of it a bit too late on in the process is basically yeah, what makes this exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that as we went through it, it's almost it felt as though when we were looking at the process of, okay, we've got to the letter of engagement, right, we now need to almost kick off that AML process, the due diligence process. But actually, when we started having these conversations, for me, it was like eyes wide open of going, wow, I've got all of this information. How can I start to bring it in earlier into that kind of conversation? And I think that leads nicely on then of almost into, well, actually, what could the process look like? So for me, it's about how do I use that information in the discovery call? Again, I'll be able to save time by running a company report, using that to almost, I think, impress the prospect, because I'm not sure whether every other firm is going to be doing that. I can appear to be more informed. And actually, we might be able to get into the value conversation very, very quickly, because I can understand whether they've got a poor credit rating. I can understand whether they've got borrowing. And yes, I can do that at the moment, but actually, it's so many different kind of sources. And again, can I then start to turn some of those facts of number of employees into a better proposal? So for me, I'm kind of like really excited. And I think the bit that a lot of us, I think, would probably be caught out on is that audit trail, in terms of keeping track of, we did this before. Yes, there's the record. Because I've laughed at it before of going, is it a company? And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, I can see on company's house. But it's like, yes, I looked, but if I'm going to get an audit in 2 years' time, where's the evidence that I've done that? So what I'm
Yeah.
going to do now, Jacques, is to kind of jump in and to have a little look
Bef
at Socket.
before you do, Jonathan, there's a couple of questions which I think would be useful just to quickly address. Firstly, Mark has asked a question about ACSPs and Xama's kind of our support for our customers on that. Mark, if you don't mind, I'll leave that for now and answer that a little bit later on, if Jonathan allows me a little bit of time just to cover the ACSP piece. Philip has asked about the company structure. So Philip, I think I kind of answered that when I went into the credit report piece. So the bit that we saw on the visualization of the graph, that's mainly about, well, he asked basically whether you can see the ownership graph forwards and backwards. So for instance, in the example that I had, we could see that Excluserve was owned by Exclu Group. But in terms of then looking at the credit safe reports, they will also tell you if Exclusive owns any other entities as well. So there's more information around the group structure within that report. And they will also give more information about international entities within there. But quite often, if there are international entities involved, it's good that you kind of know that that exists. But quite often, you then kind of have to do a little bit of due diligence outside of Xama to then figure out who the beneficial owners are of those international entities. But the important bit is that you know they exist.
One thing we haven't touched on there, Jacques, is around the company's house monitoring. And I think that's an interesting bit of Xama in the background is constantly looking at what's changed at company's house. So I think that's fantastic that you can then bring that into the conversation as and when you do a review of a client's proposal.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much opportunity here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The monitoring will alert you of any, so it monitors the graph, not just the direct ownership. So it'll look for underlying, where most of the dodgy stuff will happen anyway, is kind of within a more complicated group structure rather than kind of directly linked PSCs. So it'll alert you of any kind of changes within that, along with other kind of filing events that you're interested in. Another question just came from Alison in terms of continuous monitoring requirements. Absolutely. I mean, this monitoring about companies' house is not really what your supervisory body would be talking about when they're talking about continuous monitoring, although PEP and sanctions monitoring as well as companies' house monitoring would add to that. Probably what they're more referring to is you monitoring your clients and have a process in place to review risk assessments and identify any kind of events that's happening within the business that should trigger a review of risk and a review of your policies and so on. But absolutely, Xama takes care of all of that, whether that's kind of the automated monitoring or helping you to review and complete risk assessments. Okay. I'll answer Mark's question, I think, when we come later on into the onboarding side of things, Jonathan.
So what I wanted to show here is almost like we have, so this is Socket, and I'm kind of like really excited that we've done that very first part of we have an integration with Xama. So I think it's always that bit of you've got to start somewhere. And I think quite often it's that bit of how do you hook things up, which is the real challenge here. But from within Socket, we're able to see what those external links are. So again, if you're connected, you can then jump straight from here into Xama. So what we're trying to do is to make the movement between systems as smooth as possible. And now we've got that in place, we can then really start to kind of build on that. So that's kind of an indication of intent and the fact that we're kind of connected. Now, I think the bit that we're really excited around is almost like the leads module. So what we've got here is almost that place where we can start to record everything which is going on. So where can it start? So it can very much start by in here, we've got a really nice Kanban board. We can add a new lead. So I can put company in. So I'm going to go with those little blue people of Smiths, and you can then search. And then effectively what this is doing is this is going and looking at company's house and is bringing back a list of all of those organizations. So again, we can then click on it and you'll see that straight away, what it's starting to do is to bring those customer, the kind of the offices in. So it enables you to be able to build things very, very simply. And there's been quite a bit of work which has gone into creating this, because it's about how do we join everything together. And example, so save that. And then what we're starting to do here is build those records. So then when we come to sync, we're able to push that straight into Xama or into your practice management system. So you can also put some sizes to it. And then what you've got here is this is then the bit where you can start to kind of build that out. I'll jump into one that we've already been working on. So the Penguin Acting Company. And so what you can see here is we've then got the various activities that we can track. So we've got the research, we've got the details from the recovery, the discovery call, and what we can also do is we can also start to see those completed tasks that are in there. Now, a couple of options. We can then start a proposal from here, or we can jump back to the Kanban board, and then from here, we can do that very much the same thing of, okay, yes, I want to start that proposal. Now, where it then becomes really interesting is from here, this is the bit where you can start to create your proposal, and you've got the kind of the information and everything there on hand. So hopefully that starts to give you the platform on which we can start to build that out. And where we're looking to head with this then, if I jump back into presentation, where we're looking to go with this then is from within that leads module, we're going to add an extra tab, which is the company details tab. And so this is then really the bit that within Socket, you'll be able to surface all of that information around the beneficial owners, show a graph of what that kind of ownership structure looks like. And again, with this as well, you can start to have those conversations with the client to bring it to life. You've also got then the ability of being able to pull out some of those key facts. And over time, where this then becomes really interesting is how do you start to use all of this information to start to seed your proposal? So we've got things such as we know the number of employees, so we can bring that across. We can ask the client to kind of confirm those details as we go through it. We've got all of the details around the initial discovery call that we can kind of start to bring in. And we've started to kind of play around with a little bit of AI to almost bring that to life. But for me, it's really exciting as to how we're suddenly shifting everything from being at the back end of a box ticking exercise, and then suddenly we're able to bring this forward.
Yeah, there's something there which is also really exciting for us, regardless of the information you can pull into the earlier stage of the process. But when you're looking there at the initial discovery call, there's so many good tools now in terms of note takers, all those kind of things which everybody will expect to start consolidating into these kind of lead module proposal, well, in terms of that kind of discovery process. And it's something that we're really interested in. Is like, how does that information come into Xama as part of that process seamlessly without having to copy and paste anything, or without having to kind of revisit those transcripts later on and figure out, okay, what is the purpose of this engagement with this business? What is the, what does that early conversations look like? And for that information to feed eventually back into Xama from here, not only does it kind of cut down on the time that you'll be spending on that piece of the KYC, but it becomes, a lot more valuable, and you're meeting a compliance requirement of having to document that you're actually performing this KYC information before the letter of engagement is signed. Quite often we'll hear comments about, okay, I'm doing AML after the letter of engagement has been signed within Xama, but that there's a bit of a gray area whether that is the way that I should be doing it, or should I be doing it before? And we're not saying go into Xama before you've even met the customer and start doing your KYC there. You are already doing it within your leads module. The fact is, you just need to record that fact within your AML system, and being able to do that seamlessly is going to make a big difference. So I think it's really the two-way of sharing information that will become the most powerful piece here.
There's a couple of questions, Jacques, around kind of the integrations, and I think we've been very, very kind of careful of making sure that these integrations work not only between Socket and Xama, but also between Socket and your practice management tool. So I know that you've got integrations with FYI, Carbon, and Engager. So we're very much that bit of, well, the sync works across those systems. Now, we, Socket, don't have a direct sync with practicing or Engager. I think it's now called Engager, isn't it? So we don't have a sync with Engager, but actually, if you have those clients in Xama, you will be able to see those clients within Socket.
In Socket,
And again, what you've got is the leads module that we've got here. It's not only for new clients, it's also for those existing clients as well. So again, if you see the opportunity of upsell, or kind of, things are changing, again, you can push that into the leads module. So the leads module goes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I saw this question from Simon coming in about FYI and the integration there, and I think it goes for all the practice management tools that we integrate with. We're just as excited about the integrations we have with practice management solutions that we are with this kind of early stage onboarding solutions. And it's really important that we make sure there's almost a kind of this trinity of applications, that early stage, whether that's your proposal software, Socket, or a different one, whether it's the practice management where your ongoing kind of job management happens, like when is risk assessments due? What do I need to know about the risk when I'm completing the next job? And then for Xama to kind of be that place in the middle, feeding off and providing information to both systems. But it is a challenge, absolutely, when you're kind of putting together systems, kind of best of breed systems. You need to be quite careful in terms of how you structure it so that data syncs in the most appropriate way. So if you're using something like FYI and using something like Socket and getting Xama in the middle there, it's important that we provide you with good guidance as to kind of best practice in terms of where do you create a new client, how does the data flow to the practice management system and then into Xama. So just as an example, it's probably best if Socket creates the client within FYI as part of that process, and then that client will automatically also be created within Xama, and then Socket's got a great system by which that client is then automatically connected into Socket, and you create that kind of link all the way through. But yeah,
we've got a couple of new elements that we've added to Socket as well, of almost the visibility. So if you're connected with Socket, Xama, Xero, FYI, you've now got some screens that are available that you're able to see the connections. And again, it's the visibility of that, I think, is really kind of powerful, because you can then start to kind of like look at it and are things kind of connected. We've also got a concept within Socket of aliases. And like for me, this was a big frustration when we started building Socket, that different systems, the company was called something slightly different or trading as. And so we've got the kind of the concept in there of aliases, and we use that from a mapping perspective.
Yeah, perfect.
So
I see
I
there's
think,
quite a few more questions. I don't know if you want to quickly browse through and see if
yeah.
you want to.
So in terms of so the leads module is in beta. So we've got a number of people who are kind of like road testing this for us. I will certainly Adam will get you added to it. It's literally we've been doing some significant work of almost kind of like refactoring it. It's, I think this is where it becomes quite exciting, is when you start to look at it, there's the quick way of doing things, and then there's the right way of doing things. And we've kind of taken that approach of actually it could just be for new opportunities, but actually we saw it as a great opportunity of also the upsell opportunities. So Adam, I will certainly, and Catherine, I will certainly make sure that you're added to it. Catherine, you've also added asked the question about free form notes. We do have a note section down the bottom that you can add things to as you go through. And again, we are open to feedback as we go through things. There's also a question around what is Socket. So yes, Socket can absolutely do the job of Ignition. If I'm a bit biased, I think we do a better job. And we're very active around kind of like building that out. So we're quite excited about like the opportunities of kind of adding more functionality and making it more of a seamless kind of process from an end-to-end perspective.
Cool.
So before we jump into kind of questions and answers, because I know you've got one that you want to answer, Jacques, I think what we can kind of see is that Socket today is really owning that discovery, proposal, and letter engagement piece. We're bringing the kind of the consistency to the pricing, and Xama is almost doing the ML piece. You can see, hopefully everyone can kind of see how we can make this a bit more of a seamless process. But actually, I think we can even take that even further around an onboarding kind of module, because I know that there's so much information that we need to collect as we go through. And in some instances, I think then that should take you back of, well, if something's not right on the proposal, why aren't you going back and changing it? You had a conversation around the number of transactions or the number of people. If you know that information's not right, we should be going back and changing it. So I think that we've just got started, but I think there's massive opportunity of us kind of building out that onboarding module and then really bringing it to life. So collecting email addresses of who we need to do the ID checks for, almost making that kind of seamless. So we're not asking the client for lots of different information. We're asking it for once, and then there's a beautiful workflow behind that. So that's something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I mean, potentially, quite obviously, that is the biggest pain point that people have, is this kind of process where the letter of engagement is signed, and then there's almost an endless amount of communication that's going on for various parts of the onboarding process. And AML is kind of quite a substantial part of that, especially if you've got multiple beneficial owners and you have to send out multiple requests for IDs, collecting information about other kind of risk related factors and so on. So very much a process which we're looking at, and we've already announced, and this is kind of going to tie in with Mark, your question about the ACSP stuff. This is something that we've kind of pushed up the priority list quite a bit now, is to ensure when people are going to have to re-onboard potentially more directors than they would have done before, because a director is not necessarily a beneficial owner. We need to streamline that process in order to communicate better with companies that we work with. So the idea from a Xama perspective is to create, and we're working on that, is to create a process by which you primarily communicate with your primary contact. So that's the kind of person who's also signing the letter of engagement, or who you're having those initial conversations with. And rather than it being your problem in terms of figuring out, how to get the documents from other people, you can do that via the primary contact, who can then distribute and ensure that those onboarding processes are completed. But it goes on a little bit further than that, and this is where it becomes exciting when we talk about onboarding systems and this onboarding module. Really what we want to do is embed that process into where people are already completing this type of stuff. So think about it really, or this is the best way I can feel like I can explain it, is you would expect your proposal system, when the letter of engagement is signed, to be able to collect a payment or to set up a go cardless or a direct debit. And really what we want Xama to be is that almost AML module that you can plug into that journey. And rather than, oh, they've now done their proposal, now we send out a bunch of stuff, they basically completing that process as part of that onboarding journey, and you have all the information at the end of that process that you need to then complete the risk assessment and so on. And that's not just for the collection of IDs, it's also hopefully for the collection of other information, so kind of forms that can be customized and sent out to customers to complete as part of that same process. But really, it was always hard. This is the bit where Xama was never going to be we were never going to build a proposal system or a letter of engagement, or that's not our business. So we needed to find a partner whose business that is and who's really, really good at it. And that's why we're really excited about this, because we can really see how we can align what we're building to work seamlessly with what Socket is building, and kind of doing it at this stage when we're still very much in the process of development makes that just super powerful, because we can really kind of almost work as a really align how we do things to get to the best result.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited, and I think that goes some way of kind of answering Mark's question, where he's kind of said, what's the best in class system? So Xama, Socket, and a practice management system, but where does the master record sit? I think the answer is it sits in one place, but actually the key thing here is actually how do you navigate from one place to another, and that's something that we've worked really hard in Socket to almost kind of give you that ability of being able to do the deep link of, right, okay, I want to see this client now in Xama, I can jump to it. I want to see this client now in Xero, and jumping to it. So for me, it's like that bit of, it's not about duplicating all of the information. It's about being able to navigate to the right place very, very easily. And we're constantly kind of like looking at that in terms of what's the right level of data that we should have. How can we make sure it's connected? So we're working very hard there, Mark, of almost making sure that it's easy to navigate between the various systems. I'll jump in and answer some of the other questions. So there's a great anonymous question, and I'm glad this is an anonymous one, where they've said, is the leads module, do I need to be using Xama? You don't, because what we're going to do is going to be, there's elements here which are powered by Xama. So I'm sure Jack would love you all to be using Xama, but if you're using a different tool, then you will absolutely be able to get value from the leads module, and you'll be able to surface some of that information that helps you to move as quickly as kind of possible. So again, we're acknowledging that not everyone is going to be on Xama, but I'm sure Jack would love to see you all on Xama.
Yeah, I mean, it's we try to play nicely with everybody. So really, I think the concepts that we're talking about here in terms of how Xama's going to work with Socket is really exciting concepts. But I know, and there's potentially people on this call who's very happy with their existing kind of discovery processes and so on. So I hope the discussion that we had here today is not, this is not just about how we bring that information into Socket, but it's hopefully from our point of view is how do you start utilizing the information that we have in Xama earlier on. Doesn't matter what that discovery process looks like, whether that's a manual process or whether you're using different systems. And we'll obviously also, we explore that same concepts with other partners in terms of practice management solutions and so on. So I feel it's more about like a shift of how you look at AML and where you can start getting more value from it is the most important things. But we will continue to play nicely with everybody who likes to integrate with us.
There's a question there around, does Socket keep a manual price override? So within that, I'm not totally sure of the kind of question, but is it the ability, do you have the ability to override some of the pricing? Yes, you can override the pricing, but actually we've created a bit of friction there of you can either do it as a discount or you can put it in as additional work. So what we want to do is we want to keep track of why a price has been changed from the normal. There's quite a bit of excitement around the leads module. What I'd say, if as I said, it's in beta, but if people want to be part of that beta program, then Rich has kind of said to me this morning that we're looking to kind of open that and getting a few people to get involved in the testing. So if you're interested, then reach out and drop me a note and I can get you added to the beta kind of program. And as I say, I'm expecting that the embedded Xama elements will be in there within the next couple of weeks. So yeah, we're making brilliant kind of progress, and I'm kind of chomping at the bit to start using this in my own practice. So I think we are at time there. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I hope you've got a bit from the discussion. And I think for me, it's almost that bit of let's tip the whole process. What Jack said, you don't have to be using Socket or Xama to see the value. For me, it's that bit of how do we move away from the fear of, oh, I've got to do compliance, to almost like this being exciting and this adding value to the account management piece. You will get a recording of the webinar, and that should be with you tomorrow. And if you want to find out more, then yeah, love to hear from you. usocket.com or head to Xama Tech. And yeah, we're here to help, and can't wait to be back in the future in terms of kind of sharing what next, because I think it's going to be quite exciting in terms of what we can build together. So Jack, thanks for your time, and yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for joining.